Thank you. Thank you, and good afternoon, members, and welcome to this Overview and Scrutiny meeting for Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council. Warm welcome and a warm welcome to any residents that may be watching and any members of the press that might also be there. Before we carry on, could I just ask Claire Johnston, our Democratic Services Officer, just to give us a bit of housekeeping information. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Please note that this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Board is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council's website for a minimum of 6 months. In order to ensure the meeting is managed effectively, please could everyone present follow these ground rules for speaking. Only speak when invited to do so by the Chairman. Always turn on your video and function when invited to speak. Please state your name before you speak if you have not been introduced by name. Please could you mute your microphones when you speak on an item? Please do so by utilising the raise your hand feature in the bar at the top of the Teams window. The messaging bar should not be used unless you are raising a point of order or providing the wording for a motion. Please remember that this panel is visible to all and subject to public information requests. If at any point you would like to speak again, please use the raise your hand feature once again. If a vote is required on any item, the Democratic Services Officer will call out each board member's name, beginning with the Chairman and Vice Chairman. Please could you respond with a for, against, or if you wish to abstain. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and that mobile phones are switched off or turned to a silent setting for the duration of the meeting. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Claire. Apologies, please, Claire.
Yes, we've received apologies for this meeting from Councillor Vicky Slade and have been notified that Councillor Andrews will be substituting for her.
Thank you, Claire. And substitute members, I'm not aware of any others, so I think that's it, Claire.
That's it, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Declarations of interest. Do any councillors have any disclosable pecuniary interests or any local interests on any items on the agenda?
It's Tony O'Neill. I declare that I have family through marriage that are based at Waitrose head office.
Okay, thank you, Councillor O'Neill. Okay, seems no other declarations, so we'll move on to the substantial item on the agenda today, which is the scrutiny of the sale of Christchurch Bypass Car Park Cabinet report. Now, just before we move into this, and I invite the leader of the council, Councillor Drew Mellor, to introduce the report. It is highly probable that at some stage during the debate, we will be moving into private session for confidential reasons. But when and if we get to that point, I would just like to give members notice that after Councillor Mellor has introduced the report, I'll invite members to speak. If at any time during that debate members feel that they are encroaching into the confidential area, then at that point we will go below the line. So I hope that's perfectly clear. Now, when we've had the debate and we come out of the closed session, at that point, if there are any recommendations coming from the board, at that point we'll go back into open in order for the public to hear recommendations if they're made, and also to close the meeting off formally. Okay, so with no further ado then, could I please ask Councillor Drew Mellor to introduce the paper to us? Thank you, Drew.
Thanks, Stephen. Firstly, can I just start by thanking you and the committee for putting this meeting on at short notice. It was really important in the negotiations that it's happened before the full council meeting. So thank you for working with us on that. It's much appreciated. I'd also just like to thank our lead officer on this, Sam, who's has done a considerable amount of work negotiating, and you'll hear through the update and also the supplementary paper, Chair, that there's been a material update since we took this to Cabinet. So thank you to Sam. And lastly, I'd just like to commend both of the ward councillors, Councillor Peter Hall and Councillor Mike Cox, for their work with me in terms of discussing this. So thank you very much to all concerned. Chair, I won't breach the confidentiality in my introduction, and then we'll hopefully keep as much of this meeting as possible above the line effectively. We've seen from our paper that's been delivered to us over the weekend that the negotiations have moved on materially since we were at Cabinet. The word I used at Cabinet was permanency. I wanted to make sure there was a permanency to the protection that we had in terms of that the site's use as a car park, and we at the time it was for a number of years, and now we've got that negotiated, so we have a permanent right of that, which is really which is great. So effectively, the deal we now have before us is a well negotiated deal, and it's effectively as good as we're going to get. So what's happened, what's changed between the last report is we haven't changed the valuation, we have changed the protections, and we haven't changed the methodology of our ability to buy back the asset, the valuation methodology, if we did exercise that option. So there's a good deal in front of us, which we're delighted to bring forward. Ultimately, Chair, this comes down to a judgment call for the discussions around the Waitrose sort of Waitrose facility in Christchurch and the longevity of that. And then the asset and whether we're getting a reasonable value for that asset. I've been clear on a number of occasions that this administration's aim is absolutely not to sell assets. We don't want to consider it in many circumstances. A compelling case to do that, and the compelling case before us today to consider that is to say that the Waitrose in Christchurch will enter into a lease on the back of this transaction coterminously to secure that for a material number of years. And I won't mention the number of years just in case that's a detail. So we will have if we do this today, it will deliver Waitrose in Christchurch as a matter of fact for a reasonable amount of time. As effectively, what we're trying to do today, and I really welcome Overview and Scrutiny's feedback on it, is to that judgment call. Do we want to do that? Do we believe there's a risk of Waitrose leaving Christchurch or not? How big of a risk is it, and how important to Christchurch is Waitrose being there? We're adamant that we want to support Waitrose retaining in Christchurch long term, and we believe this transaction does that. But who are the right people to make that judgment call effectively in terms of what is the risk to Christchurch? And what are the benefits of signing this deal? Well, it's my belief, Chair, that those people to make that decision, to weigh up that local knowledge of the Christchurch councillors. So what I'm proposing from the administration group is that we will actually abstain when this comes to full council tomorrow night, with the exception of Councillor Peter Hall, who is a Christchurch councillor, and we will look to Christchurch councillors to effectively determine this decision. What I'm very happy to do today is to talk about the transaction, talk about the negotiations, and talk about the rationale behind it. But ultimately, the arbiters of that decision, the best place for that decision in my mind, are the Christchurch councillors. So we look forward to doing that. I'll just run through a summarised, Chair, of a few points. What does this do? This transaction do? It does guarantee Waitrose in Christchurch for a material number of years further than they are already. It does net a positive capital receipt for council. It does keep our ability to permanently retain that site as a car park forever, if we want to. It does lose an income stream, and it does lose our ability to develop that site. But it would be very difficult to imagine a scenario where we would develop that site outside of being a car park while Waitrose is there, Chair. So hopefully that's enough of an introduction. We're very happy to take questions. I know we've got officers here to take questions as well, and welcome the debate, Chair.
Thank you very much, Leader. So members, I see no hands raised, but can I invite you to ask your questions, please? Councillor Dedman, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. And I'm very glad that this has come to ONS because, as everybody will remember, I had a list of, I think it was 14 questions, which I was able to give to the Leader at Cabinet, which I think has resulted in some of this activity. I'm just concerned, and I'm very interested in what the Chairman is saying about Christchurch members voting on this. I wasn't quite sure what he meant, but it's a litmus test for the Christchurch's view of this administration. And there's a lot of concern, not just for this site, but generally about the attitude of the administration towards Christchurch. I know that a lot of people felt that the administration was asset stripping our borough, and that's not only many Christchurch councillors. I must say I had that feeling, but many residents as well. And there were concerns about the lack of openness, the lack of transparency. So again, Chairman and Leader, I'm very, very glad that we're able to do this as much as we possibly can in a transparent manner. I don't think the case was made at all in the paperwork that we saw, and I don't think that the case has been made in the additional papers. I do very much appreciate that Sam has done a huge amount of work in a very short time, and I must congratulate her on that. But we are still very much behind with reasons, no detail of a lot of the reasons. I've still got a lot of questions to ask, Chairman, but at the moment I'm going to leave it there because I think that there's a lot to come out on this. And I'm sure that other people do want to get in, so I'll stop and hope that I can come back later on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Dedman. I'm sure there'll be an opportunity later. Councillor O'Neill, thank you.
I don't know whether we want to discuss now, but I'd like to talk a little bit about retailer strategy because I have some questions that will be related to this deal, probably best done offline, similar to why the contract itself term is not being.
Okay, just a moment. We've got Councillor Hadley coming in. If Councillor Hadley, your questions are not related to confidential matters, would you like to go ahead now?
Thank you. Yes, I'll try and avoid the confidential matters. I mean, I guess part of this is this is an income stream that we get on this car park and we lose as part of this deal. I think the loss of access for the public is a concern. And indeed the access is to buildings behind. But I think it is also are Waitrose really going to give up on Christchurch, which seems to me to be a solid place for them to be in terms of commercial opportunities. And is it just the landlord that's trying to get more money, or has an alternative plan for the site, which, very similar to what we've done with the car parks in central Bournemouth, could include flats and other proposals over the top of the car park, in which case we're giving them a real bargain. And I think that's the judgment call, as the leader put it, around whether we're getting good value for the site. The confidential paper that I have seen attached to the agenda for this evening's meeting doesn't give the revised terms, so I'm not assured that the whilst it's very helpful, and I did ask for permanency in terms of if we have the opportunity to buy it back at a reasonable rate, but I'm still concerned as well on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hadley. Councillor Marcus Andrews, can you speak?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hope you can hear me. I've got a few questions stroke points. In the open papers, we're told that the Waitrose lease doesn't actually run out until 2027. It could be, I don't know, Christmas 2027. We don't know exactly when. And we're told that we have to sell to secure them staying on beyond, obviously, 2027. It's a long time in the future. You cast your minds back 12 months, we didn't know what was going to happen in the future then, this is in several years' time. We're told that to secure Waitrose staying, they need a single lease granted by their landlord to include the car park. Well, there are other options of giving Waitrose a single lease or a lease of the car park. We could grant a lease direct to Waitrose of the car park, or we could grant a lease to General Motors Pension Fund and then they could sublet it to Waitrose. That ticks the box on that. We're also told, and it was in the local newspaper today, that there's been a memo that the Waitrose have issued to their staff, where they say to the staff, and obviously that's sort of now been talked about by the staff to their parents or to their other partners, that they've got no intention of going anyway. It's a negotiating tactic to, through their landlords to get the car park, so they can, recover all those refunds they do on parking charges. I'm not happy with the sum agreed. I think that there are items that have been missed out. There's licence fee monies coming in from the people who use the car park to get to Beaconsfield Road, and I don't know what it is. I have asked, but not been told yet. But when I used to chair the Policy and Resources Committee of Christchurch Borough Council, those sums got reported to the committee, and they were not small sums. They were large sums. Now, obviously, perhaps it's gone down over the past 25 years. I don't know. But supermarket investments are very popular now with commercial property investors. Over the past 12 months, all supermarkets have seen a 15% increase in turnover, because obviously people buy more food because they're not going to restaurants and pubs. And now supermarket investments have really shot up in value. For example, the M&S out at Ferndown got sold recently at a 4% return. That's 25 times the rent, so I think we're underselling this one. And, in fact, I don't think we should be selling it anyway. But anyway, there's a couple of points there to make. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Andrews. Councillor Mellor, would you like to come back in on any of those points that you can discuss outside the confidential area? I can see your hand is up, Councillor Cox, so I'll come back to you as soon as Councillor Mellor has spoken. Yeah,
thank you very much, Joe. We'll come back in on some of those points, and I'll take them chronologically from the top. Councillor Dedman talked about, effectively, she had a lot of questions under this, and we're getting some more of her questions later, I'm sure. Just to be absolutely clear, Chairman, I have been really consistent in this in terms of said we need a permanency to this. And the initial covenant protection wasn't sufficient, and we have now negotiated up. So effectively, I'll say to Councillor Dedman, we have inherited, a piece of work that your Unity Alliance started. We've negotiated it into a significantly better position, with the help and thanks of Councillor Cox and Councillor Hall, whose advice enabled us to take confidence and to negotiate that further. So it's not something we've done on our own. We've done it in partnership with the two ward councillors. You also mentioned asset stripping, which is frankly something you have entirely no evidence for. There's absolutely no asset in Christchurch that we're looking to move forward as an administration or as a Conservative administration to dispose of. Quite the opposite, actually. What we're looking to do, and I've been consistent when I've talked about regeneration, is we're looking at investing in our assets and maintaining them. I mean, bringing forward a £50 million futures fund, what we're going to be doing is significantly investing in Christchurch. So I refute that. I refute that point. In terms of transparency, I think that the fact that we've got this meeting today, move forward at some pace, the fact that we, as a general piece of as an administration have brought forward a huge amount of all member seminars. I also won't take any advice from her about transparency. In terms of moving to Councillor Andy Hadley, there is no loss of access by this. There is protection in terms of any alternative plan. So if it's materially moved forward and in a different scheme than is in front of us, we will have control over that. So I take the points and appreciate them, but I think we can address them. I think Councillor Andrews gets to a very important point, which is around his view that it's a negotiating tactic, effectively, from Waitrose and from Aberdeen Asset. And that is the judgment call, isn't it? It's not my place to suggest which side of that coin I will, I will agree on. But that is the risk. Is it a negotiating tactic, or is there a material risk of losing Waitrose, which would be an absolute travesty for that town? And it's something we're committed to trying to not do. So what we've done is we've presented a transaction which is bluntly as good as we believe we can get it. It will give us a permanency about control over that car park, and it will give us a permanency for a material period of time for Waitrose to be in that store. The licence fee, I do have the licence fee number available. I don't see how that could possibly be below the line. But we're going to move into private session, I presume, at some point, so I'll bring it forward then. It is negligible. My understanding of it is negligible. So just to summarise, Chair, I, as Conservative administration, are absolutely going to protect, the assets of Christchurch. We're going to invest in Christchurch. We are not doing anything other than that through this paper. The right people to determine this are the councillors of Christchurch. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Leader. I should have mentioned just now, of course, Councillor Hadley is not a member of this board, but he did ask in advance if he could speak, and so I did allow him to, as is the case with Councillor Peter Hall, who will be speaking in a minute. But first of all, I'd like to ask Councillor Mike Cox to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to thank Councillor Drew Mellor for inviting me to a special meeting with Councillor Peter Hall to discuss this matter a few days ago. I just wanted to correct something in the actual report, though, which talks about consultation with ward councillors. I actually didn't get consulted. In fact, I had an apology from Sam Munnings that I wasn't consulted on this prior to it going to Cabinet. I was actually spoken to briefly by Councillor Nigel Brooks in passing, actually, and he outlined a few of the what he considered the terms were, and they seemed reasonable to me. I'm not for selling it, not selling, but it depends on the price. At the end of the day, it depends on the price that we sell at, as to whether we should sell it or not. And so, based on a judgment call at the time, it seemed reasonable to me to sell it, providing the price was right, and the relevant conditions have been put in place. However, having looked at the conditions so far, and having thought about the threat of Waitrose leaving, I can't see the I said it to Drew at the meeting. I really don't see that there is a threat of Waitrose leaving. And having seen the memo, I actually saw the memo which has been put out to staff. There's absolutely not a cat in hand. One of the points I was trying to make to a few people is that if Waitrose can't make Christchurch pay as a store, then they really need to give up and go home, because this is prime territory, in my opinion, for the Waitrose brand. So I don't see that threat at all. A lot of it then goes down to the fact, is it the right valuation? Now, I'm not like Councillor Andrews. I don't really have an expertise in these matters, but I do regularly see valuation reports in my job as an auditor. And I have to say that the valuation report which came through only the other day was pretty back of the envelope stuff. I think my comment would be he was told the figure and he was told, get to that figure. I really don't think that was a particularly well written piece of valuation work, and therefore I'm not confident at all that is the right valuation. So addressing the 2 points that Councillor Mellor raised about it being the longevity of Waitrose, I don't see there being a problem with that, and the valuation being the right valuation, I don't think it is the right valuation. And against that is the risk, and you've talked about permanency. Well, the best way of permanently keeping it is not to sell it, and that to me seems the best route forward at the moment, is not to sell it, but to make sure that Waitrose are happy to be tenants, and do everything you can, whether it's doing a back-to-back lease with Waitrose to make sure that they are happy with the management of the car park. So I'm definitely not happy with the sale at the moment on these premises. So, but I did want to raise the point. I don't think Waitrose are going anywhere. I'm absolutely convinced about that. But we should obviously try and keep them as long as they're still a brand, to be honest. And if we're going to sell it, then we should sell it for the right price. And I don't believe this is the right price.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Councillor Mark Howell, please.
Thank you. I'd just like to firstly just clarify from the Unity Alliance perspective how this started. Certainly, unfortunately, Councillor Slate isn't available to be here today. This proposal, in its very initial stages, was brought to her by officers as a possibility. There was some initial discussion, but in no way was it ever progressed by the Unity Alliance. It was never brought to Cabinet informally or formally, and it is very much something that in its initial stages was being developed, as I say, by officers. And I'd just like to ask the leader, whether that is essentially what has been happening under his administration, because I could quite believe that process has just continued in the background, and he was brought to knowledge of this relatively late in the process. I very much think it'd be helpful if we understood whether this is coming from the politicians, so to speak, or from the officer corps. Thank you.
Do you want to come back on that, Councillor Mellor?
Yeah, let me come back on that one first. Thank you, and then I'll also, while I'm here, Chair, if I may, I'll respond briefly to Councillor Cox. Not quite. I don't agree actually in terms of Councillor Howell. So effectively, what happened in my involvement in this has been in October. So we came into administration on the 1st of October. We relatively quickly had I forget the name of it, but it's the investment panel, which also looks at disposals of assets. That was on the item then. I was really clear in that meeting, outside of this asset, but as a general thing. And it won't be any surprise to anybody. I've said this repeatedly in public session. I do not believe we should be selling assets. I believe this is the time, particularly where the levels of debt as it is, this administration this authority should be investing and buying assets. So I started the first meeting with that clear direction. I was told that there was this site was up for discussion, and I was clear then at that point we needed permanency of retention of a car park. If the judgment call would be that Waitrose, the loss of Waitrose was a real threat. So I have been active in it, on a regular basis, and effectively we've now got to the position we have gotten to where there's a deal in front of us. I don't believe we should be selling assets. I don't believe we need to, but I also don't believe we should be losing Waitrose. So my position on this is it's a judgment call, and the right people to take that judgment call are the Christchurch councillors who can weigh that up. So hopefully that answers Councillor Howell's question. In terms to Councillor Cox, yes, Councillor, I'll potentially extend my apologies to those of the officer for not consulting initially. My view on that very much was we hadn't got to a position where we were happy to proceed. We hadn't got to the finish of the transaction. So as soon as we'd gotten to a position that it was starting to be in the realms of something we could move forward on, i.e. the permanency piece, because we had achieved that permanency, that's when I brought you in and thanked you for your feedback, which did shape the better transaction we've got in front of us now. Again, on to Councillor Cox, you mentioned evaluation report. Again, I'm not an expert. We both have a corporate finance background. Mine is, I'm not a valuer, but this is a market valuation, and our professional council officers have said the valuation has been done on a market basis. So I accept that. Where you actually, just to where you sort of finish effectively, you talk about permanency, and the only way we can have permanency is to retain ownership. You're absolutely right about that. You then went on to say, but we need to make sure that that Waitrose are happy. Effectively, they're not too. You can't do both. Effectively, the way we've been told to make sure they're happy is to sell them. That's absolutely fine, and I don't. I would welcome yours and other people's ultimate decisions as arbiters on this. But we should be clear. There is a risk here. If we don't fall through this transaction, there is a risk that we could lose Waitrose in 2027. And what we would be doing is not extending them for a material amount of years, which this contract does do. So it's a judgment call. I don't want to sell assets, but there's a judgment call to be made here. And as and when we make that decision, we need to live with it and stand by it, and that's why I'm saying the best people to weigh that balance, to weigh that risk up to the Christchurch Town of the Christchurch councillors. But I think I've answered both of the Councillor Cox and Councillor Howe's questions, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. What I would like, will there be opportunities again in a moment when we move under the line, Councillor Howe? Okay.
Well, Chair, it's not a question related to under the line. I just want to clarify that the second point I was going to ask. It's the report says consistently that Waitrose are potentially going to leave. Have we actually been speaking to Waitrose, and have Waitrose been saying this, or is this information that is coming from the actual owner of the Waitrose site? Because it's being portrayed as if we're in the report as if we are directly speaking to Waitrose.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Howe. It's a very good question, and one indeed that I've got on my list, which I was going to ask in a little while. But Councillor Mellor.
I'll take advice from officers as to what point this does actually get us into the detail of negotiation. The main negotiation is effectively with who we would be selling the site to, and that is not Waitrose, that is Aberdeen Asset, I believe. If any officer wants to give more detail than that, then they're welcome to. But I probably shouldn't give more detail than that.
I think we'll wait, and we'll probably get into that in a minute. Councillor Peter Hall.
Thank you very much, Chairman, for allowing me to reward Councillor for this site. I am very much against the sale of this car park, which is adjacent to Waitrose. My main reason that we should not be selling assets, especially like this one, which brings in a considerable revenue year upon year. Every 5 years, it generates enough money to cover the proposed sale price. That's a massive 20% return, which is an excellent return. We're going to lose over 200 town centre car parking spaces through recent planning decisions. This large 202 car parking space is providing short-term and long-term parking. It will also help ensure that we'll be able to re-establish a private town centre. I am sure that Waitrose are committed to stay in Christchurch. No risk of them leaving, in my opinion. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hall. Before I ask you to respond to that, Councillor Mellor, could I bring in Councillor Rigby to ask his question? Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. It's quite a simple question, actually. You've spoken about how we've considered all the different options. I was just wondering whether you've considered us borrowing and potentially making an offer to take ownership of the Waitrose site as well, and then be able to offer the Waitrose for both the building and the car park as well. I think you've said in the past that borrowing, we can do that at quite a low rate. So is it something that we've thought about? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We've got one more question coming up from Councillor Allison, so I'd ask him to ask that and you can address all those. Thank you. Councillor Allison.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to ask whether or not we've had quite a lot of discussion about whether or not we should be selling assets, and the leader's given his opinion on that. I just wanted to make sure, do we have any kind of formal or written policy on assets selling, or is it just the opinion of the administration that we're working from at the moment?
Okay, thank you. Leader, would you want to respond to those?
Yeah, I will. I noticed that Adam Richards put his hand up when it was Councillor Rigby's question. So rather than me saying something that gets us above the line, I believe Adam will have a better balance of that. So perhaps we can go to Adam for that, and also for Lewis Allison's question.
So, if Chair, just to introduce myself, my name's Adam Richins. I'm the Council's Section 151 officer and Chief Financial Officer. Just to highlight with regards to the rules on borrowing at the moment, you're probably aware there's been a lot of activity by both Her Majesty's Treasury and by SITFA in defining the rules around borrowing. At this moment in time, as it stands, we should not be borrowing from PWLB for commercial yield purposes. but we can still borrow from them for a number and variety of other reasons, including regeneration. SITFA are about to consult or are in the process of consulting along the same lines about borrowing for yield should be avoided. But that clearly extends beyond just borrowing from PWLB. That also would therefore apply to non-PWLB borrowing as well, because the council would always have that option. So just to hopefully add that clarity to the debate.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Richards. Councillor Mellor?
Yeah, thank you. And I also believe that there is an asset disposal policy because we've certainly got an investment policy. But Adam can tell me if there's formally a policy on that or not. What I'll just add to what our Section 151 officer has said, that is exactly why it's one of the many reasons why we've come forward with our big plan, Chris. Effectively, because we now need to focus. The opportunity to borrow needs to be focused on regeneration. So that's why we brought it in around housing, homes primarily, effectively, because we could look. Historically, we could have looked at that more optimistically. Now it's been more difficult for us to do that. Not impossible, but more difficult. So we want to focus our opportunity around growth on regeneration and homes, effectively building and buying a lot more homes. I'll say just in terms of Councillor Hall, it's incumbent on me probably to say that the figures you've quoted are not net of costs effectively. So you're right in terms of the revenue thing, but they're not net of costs. But your point is valid. We would be losing a long-term, and consistent revenue stream. The last point you make around a thriving town centre, couldn't agree with you more. We have to deliver a thriving town centre for Christchurch. That is obviously, in that context, it's really important to keep Waitrose there. And again, I repeat and apologise for my broken record, Chair. That is why that judgment call is so important by the Christchurch councillors, because we must keep a thriving Christchurch town centre. And what's the best way to do that? Retention of this car park or retention of Waitrose for that X number of years. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Councillor Leslie Dedman, did you want to speak again?
Well, I do, but I still would like the question answered, probably by Mr. Richins, about have we got a written asset policy? I know the leader said we've got part of one. Can Adam just answer that before I carry on?
Thank you, Mr. Richins.
Well, I'm going to pause very slowly in the hope that other officers might be able to come to my rescue as part of the process. But I seem to recall that when we, through the shadow authority process, we did set up some basic, if you like, asset management, plans and policy procedures that were adopted. Whether they included a statement on the council's position with regards to disposals would be something that I would need to take away and confirm or not.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Richards. For what it's worth, my understanding is that the paper is still in work. It was to be presented to us, but it's now been deferred to a little later in the year. That's not really a lot of help, Councillor Dedman, but that's my understanding of it at the moment.
Yes, well, thanks very much, Mr. Richards, and nobody came to your aid. That was really very sad. Yeah, never mind. Good try.
Thank you for coming to my aid. Thank you, Adam.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Well done. But can I just carry on then, Chair? I don't know the mechanics of this, but I would like to cut this a bit shorter and to ask that this committee is able to put a recommendation that instead of the recommendation that we will have from Cabinet, which is for the sale of the, and I haven't got it in front of me because I've got too many screens on the go, but the motion is for the committee, the full council to sell the Christchurch bypass car park. Could I ask that this committee put a recommendation to full council that the council does not sell the Christchurch bypass car park, but keeps the operations and ownership in the BCP council? And then bearing in mind what Mr. Richins has said, that also can I add on this that the council requests the head of estates as a matter of urgency to produce an asset policy for acquisitions and disposals, which I understand will be an easy one because clearly we're going to do that, or we're doing it now. So, Chair, is it possible to put that motion to the committee for that recommendation to go to full council, please?
I think there is, but I see that Sam Munnings has put a hand up here, and I'm just wondering, we may be able to get some clarity on the capital asset policy, which may negate the second part of your recommendation, possibly.
Oh, yes. So, I just popped that in on the spur of the moment.
So could I ask Sam Munnings to come in, please?
Thank you, Councillor. It's regarding the asset management plan. The legacy authorities did have asset management plans, but obviously going forward to BCP, that needs to be updated to take account of the new council's projects and desires. I'm afraid to say it was slightly delayed due to COVID. We were hoping to get things started last year, but other things have been more important. It is now in train. And we will have an asset management plan in due course for Cabinet and Council to consider.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mellor.
Just briefly, Chair, just to say, the change of administration also wouldn't have aided that, because we've got a quite materially different view on effectively, asset policy and the fact we want to retain. So that would have been a part of the process. So it's as much a change of administration. But thank you very much to Sam for saying that.
Okay, thank you. So, Councillor Dedman, in view of that information, do you still want to include the second part of your recommendation, or do you want to leave it as the first part about just dealing with the sale of the asset of the car park?
I'm sorry, I can't type and think there, Chair. I've popped in the sidebar in very bad typing what I was asking that this committee proposes. I'm happy to take out the asset policy for acquisitions and disposals, because I am confident that that will be coming along in due course. So I'm asking if Councillor Cox would second that, as I know we talked about it earlier.
A seconder for Councillor
I believe Councillor Kelsey's got his hand raised in your bar, Chair.
Councillor Kelsey.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to second that, Chair. I think it's a really good idea to go forward with it that way.
All right, thank you. Before we actually vote on that, I think there are some other issues that need to be brought out, and I think that and Councillor O'Neill has already mentioned this. So before we take the vote, I think we need to carry on the discussion a bit longer and look at some of those. So with the board's agreement, I would just like to take us below the line, and I'll just read out this notice to that effect, that under section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act of 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 in part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest in withholding the information outweighs such interest in disclosing the information. Vice Chair, could I ask you to second me on that, please?
Yes.
Okay, do we have any other dissent from that? Okay, we'll move into closed session now. Could you please stop the line? Welcome back, members and members of the public. We've had an interesting debate, and but we do have a motion that's on the table, proposal by Councillor Leslie Dedman, and the proposal is recommend from this committee that this board that this council does not sell the Christchurch bypass car park, but keeps the operations ownership in the BCP council. And this has been seconded by Councillor David Kelsey. So, members, I think we've had a thorough, unless anybody else wants to speak at this point, I think we'll go to the vote. So, Democratic Services, could I please ask you to take a vote?
How do we do that?
Thank you, Chairman. I will call out each board member's name in turn, beginning with the chair and vice chair. Please could you respond with for, against or abstain on this motion? Councillor Bartlett.
For.
Councillor O'Neill.
For.
Councillor Allison.
For.
Councillor Andrews.
For.
Councillor Borthwick. Councillor Cox.
Oops.
For.
Councillor Dedman.
For.
Councillor Dion.
For.
Councillor Earl.
For.
Councillor Edwards.
For.
Just to confirm that Councillor Farr, I believe, is still not on the call. Councillor Fear. Councillor Howe.
For.
Councillor Kelsey.
For.
And Councillor Rigby.
For.
Chairman, that is unanimous.
Thank you very much. Well, members, I think we've now come to the end of that discussion. Has anybody else got anything else like to raise at this point? Because if not, then we will close the meeting. Councillor Dedman.
Yeah, sorry, only to reiterate, Chair, that I'm really glad that this has come to overview and scrutiny. Very grateful to you for putting this meeting in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, thank you, members, and I'll see you tomorrow.